Hello and welcome to this special episode of the Bob Zadek Show. I'm Charlie Deist, Bob's producer and fellow lover of liberty, and today I have the special honor of interviewing Professor Walter Block for a follow-up interview on a topic that he and Bob didn't have time to cover a few weeks ago when Walter was on the live Sunday show. For those of you who are just finding this interview without having heard the original show, I would just direct you to bobzadek.com. Click on the past shows where you'll find Bob's archived interviews with top libertarian thinkers. It's the show of ideas, not attitude, and it airs live every Sunday at 9 a.m. Pacific. First, a quick introduction of our guest. Professor Walter Block teaches economics at Loyola University, New Orleans. He's a senior fellow at the Mises Institute and author of many books, including Defending the Undefendable, Parts 1 and 2, and depending on who you ask, Walter is something of a standard bearer for the cause of anarcho-capitalism, which is a pure form of libertarianism that advocates the elimination of the state in favor of individual sovereignty, private property, and open markets. It's my pleasure to introduce Professor Walter Block. How are you this afternoon, Walter?
Pretty good, Charlie. Thanks for having me on the show. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you. Now, for a bit of background, you wrote an article recently called The Libertarian Case for Rand Paul, in which you gave ratings on a scale of 1 to 100 to various figures both inside and outside of the libertarian movement. And to calibrate the scale, you gave yourself a perfect score. So in this interview, we're going to be looking at what this scale is all about and who can truly claim the mantle of libertarianism according to your worldview. And there are many people out there who maybe claim to be libertarians, which you would dispute, and others who maybe have no interest in that label. But we're going to look at them anyway to try to get to the core of this issue. But before we get to any particular thinker, I just want to establish this baseline a little bit better. So can you tell me, what does it mean to achieve a perfect 100 on your scale? We'll call it a perfect block.
Well, I hate to be solipsistic about this or brash or whatever, but perfect 100 is whatever I believe in. And if I change my mind tomorrow, then the 100 is my new view, although I haven't changed my mind too much in the last 30, 40 years. So I'm pretty stable. But I think everybody has some sort of meter like this of agreement with a certain view or what have you. I mean, you know, we could say 100 on the Baroque scale is Mozart, if you want. And I don't know, various people would get a 95 or a 90 or an 80 as indicating how close they were to Mozart in terms of their musical style. And Shostakovich would get a low mark, and rock and roll or rap music would get a low mark. It's just sort of a way. I don't want to artificially assume precision where there is no precision. And as an Austrian economist, I'm not really into cardinal utility, which would be counting utils. Like, you know, this watch has got 10 utils and this shirt has got 20 utils, and therefore the shirt is better, twice as much, 2 times better than the watch. That's sort of a spurious scientific, or scientism as Hayek would put it. So this is just sort of rough and ready, like I'm a professor and I give grades to my students, and, you know, sometimes I give 100 and sometimes I give a 50 and a 30 and a 90 and what have you. So it's, I don't really mean it to be precise in a way that it really can't be precise. I mean it just as sort of as a rough and ready indication of how close they are to libertarianism or Austrian economics. And I have to set myself up as 100 because, I don't know, that would be the base, you know, what are my views? So, I mean, I regard Murray Rothbard and Ron Paul as much better libertarians than I in some way, in many ways, in most ways. They're more famous, they came before me, they were more creative than me perhaps, and yet I'm only giving them, say, a 97, because there are certain areas where I disagree with them. And again, I'm starting from me as the 100, and I think most people would start from themselves as 100. And if they didn't, they would change their mind. In other words, if I thought I was a 97, I'd say, well, where do I deviate from true libertarianism? And wherever I deviate from true libertarianism, I'm going to change my mind because I revere and look at as wondrousness at libertarianism. It's just the most magnificent philosophy known to man, and if I weren't perfectly congruent with it, I would change my mind. So I think I am perfectly congruent with at least the Walter Block version of it. So I'm giving myself 100, and I'm giving Murray and Ron Paul 97s because boy, oh boy, are they pretty good. And, there are certain small, well, not small, but certain issues where I disagree with each of them. For example, Murray is a pro-choice person and Ron is a pro-life person, and I'm neither. I have evictionism, so I disagree with them on that, and I disagree with Murray on, I think, what it is, immigration. He's not really an open borders person, and I might disagree with Ron Paul on his adherence to the Constitution. So there are some small, well, maybe I shouldn't say small, but some issues where I disagree with them, but they are so few and far between and so technical, so narrow. I mean, we agree on, say, legalizing of marijuana or legalizing of free enterprise. So that would be sort of a background as to how I get to the 0 to 100 view.
Right. And you mentioned Ron Paul and Murray Rothbard as the closest to achieving the perfect 100. I had Murray Rothbard on my list, and I think that this might be a question that's better illustrated by example. So I've got this list of people who we're going to go through one at a time, and I'll give you a few minutes to comment on each of them and give a score on that 1 to 100 scale. Are you ready?
Okay, well, let me just mention Murray. Another issue where I disagree with him is on voluntary slavery or specific performance contracts. For example, I think that if my son has a dread disease and you're a multi-zillionaire that has long wanted me to be your slave, and I value my son's life more than my freedom, and the only way to save my son's life is to give the doctors 10 million, and I don't have it, but you have much more of that, and you give me the 10 million, I give it to my son's doctors, and now they save his life, and now I'm your slave. I say that's a valid contract. Murray says no. Well, this is sort of really theoretical. It really doesn't come up in public policy. I don't think Hillary and Jeb Bush are going to debate over this, or
right.
I don't think most non-libertarians have ever even heard of this. But it's, I won't say a small issue, but it's a philosophical, narrow, technical philosophical issue where I disagree with Murray. So I'm only giving him a 97 because there are 2 or 3 issues like that where I disagree. Sorry to interrupt.
No problem.
On your side of the net, you shoot him at me, and I'll try to bat him out of the park.
No problem whatsoever. And since I had Rothbard on the list, we can sort of scratch him off, although I'll add one more follow-up question on that, just to sort of define what it is when we're talking about anarcho-capitalism and the philosophical underpinnings. You speak of the axiom of non-aggression, others call it a principle. What is it in your mind that puts this at the core of libertarians? And maybe just take a few minutes for the people who don't know to explain what the axiom of non-aggression is and why people like you and Murray Rothbard think it's so essential.
Well, whether we call it an axiom or a principle, I'm not going to give anyone a minus grade.
Fair enough.
That's just a verbiage. The key is non-aggression principle or the non-aggression axiom, which means, the essence of liberty or the essence of propriety or the essence of what law should be is keep your mitts to yourself. Don't put your mitts on other people or their property without their permission. And that sort of says it all. So right away, murder and slavery and kidnapping and arson and robbery and fraud and stuff would be considered illegitimate because they all contemplate or include somebody grabbing somebody else against their will or grabbing their property against their will. So libertarianism is really about what is just law, and what just law is inculcating this non-aggression principle. On the other hand, if I can sell myself into slavery or sell pot or sell used body parts like kidneys or what have you, that would be licit because you have consenting adult behavior. So that's sort of the essence of libertarianism as I see it. And now we come to the government. Does the government per se violate this? And the anarcho-capitalists would say, yes, the government violates the non-aggression principle because it taxes people against their will who didn't agree to be part of the government. Now, if you agree to be part of this club, in other words, if you join the golf club or the tennis club, you have to pay dues. If you buy a house in a condominium, you have to pay the condominium fee. But in those cases, you agreed to join, and usually your signature is on some sort of contract. So we wouldn't call that taxes. And no, some people say, well, it's really the U.S. or club, and taxes are just club dues. So, you know, shut up and pay your dues. You pay your dues to the chess club. Why don't you pay your dues to the U.S. club or to the Canada club? Or Canada club is also some booze, but forget about that. Or to the English club or to the French club or whatever. And the anarcho-capitalists following Murray Rothbard would say, well, you know, we didn't really agree to join the club. Spooner would be another one who wrote the Constitution of No Authority. So the ultimate version of laissez-faire capitalism, libertarianism, is anarchism, because the government is illegitimate. Now, libertarianism consists of much more than anarcho-capitalists. I think anarcho-capitalists, I don't know, 5 or 10% of all libertarians. The next best group, I think, would be the Ayn Rand and maybe Robert Nozick. Very, very limited government, where the government has one role and only one role, and that is to uphold non-aggression against non-aggressors or innocent people. And to that end, you need armies to keep foreign bad guys off of us, not to go around the world saving it for democracy, just for defense. Police to keep local bad guys off of us, not to stop us from engaging in victimless crimes, but to just stop murder and rape and theft and stuff like that. And then courts to determine who's the good guy and who's the bad guy. And after that, you might have Ron Paul with constitutionalism. And after that, you might have people like Milton Friedman and Friedrich Hayek, who are sort of classical liberals. I would say it's the lowest rung of libertarianism, because they allow government to do a lot more than either the Constitution or the court, army, and police kind of a thing. So that's sort of the ballpark of libertarianism. And I would put anarcho-capitalists philosophically the highest, even though we're not the most numerous.